Saul Alinsky wrote the book Rules for Radicals. He wrote a book earlier called Revelation for Radicals. And our president, as a community organizer, which is the phrase started by Saul Alinsky, taught Saul Alinsky's philosophies for several years in Chicago. Hillary Clinton wrote her paper, her thesis on Saul Alinsky, actually met the man, and he wanted her to come work with him, but she wanted to get involved in politics, and so she went off to Capitol Hill and worked as a staffer on Capitol Hill. Our president has been teaching and following a man who dedicated his book to Satan. Do you think that there is a spiritual battle going on in America and around the world? Indeed there is. Well, what did Saul Alinsky say? Well, first of all, he talked about change on almost every page. And you thought our president came up with that phrase on his own. No, the word change is used by Alinsky on almost every page. And by change, he means revolution. He also says an organizer working in and for an open society is in an ideological dilemma to begin with. He does not have a fixed truth. Truth to him is relative. Everything to him is relative. Kind of understand now why our president says one thing one day, one thing next day, or maybe in a few months. It's all based on whatever gets the job done. The first step in community organization is community disorganization. In other words, Saul Alinsky said, penetrate the middle class, disorganize, and then reorganize. Penetrate the churches, he said. Have they penetrated our churches and our seminaries and our Christian colleges and our teachers groups and our teachers organizations? Absolutely. And Saul Alinsky said this is what you must do. You see, Saul Alinsky studied a guy by the name of Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci was an Italian communist who told Mussolini, you're going about it all the wrong way. If you want a lasting revolution, you can't do it with guns and bullets. You got to get in there and you change their hearts and their minds. Their worldview is the foundation of their values. Their values is the foundation of their conduct. Change their worldview, they'll change their values, and they'll change their conduct, and you've got a lasting revolution. But if you force it with guns and bullets, it won't last. Mussolini didn't like this and threw Gramsci in jail. Well, Saul Alinsky studied the writings of Gramsci and wrote Rules for Radicals. And so one of the things you do is you stir up dissatisfaction and discontent. And he says you pit the haves against the have-nots. You get class envy going. And that's what they're doing. And it's very, very sad. And they're also race baiting, which is also horrible. He goes on to say you'll be labeled an agitator, and that's exactly what you are. You agitate to the point of conflict. Standing behind President Clinton in this picture is the man in the gray suit. Standing next to him is his wife in the blue dress with the green sweater. This is a husband and wife. She kept her maiden name. Husband and wife by the name of Cloward and Piven, radical professors at Columbia University. They studied Saul Alinsky, and in 1966, they wrote an article in The Nation magazine saying, hey, let's implement socialism, and the way to do it is to collapse the economy. And the way to collapse the economy is to create more benefits, as many benefits as you can, new benefits, put as many people on those benefits as you can, overwhelm the system till you collapse it. They introduced this in New York, and I think they started out with about 150,000 people on the welfare. When they were done 10 years later, it was like 1.5 million. See, my friends, they're deliberately collapsing our economy. And there was a man by the name of George Riley who read this article, and he began to talk to a guy named Wade Raffke. Wade Raffke started an organization in Arkansas committed to doing this. The A in his organization stood for Arkansas. It worked so well, they changed the A to association, and you now know it is ACORN, based on this philosophy of Saul Alinsky and the Cloward-Piven strategy.
If you are a person of faith, you need to decide today, how big is the God you serve? The God we serve is bigger than any giant in the state of Texas. It's bigger. He is bigger than the professional protesters on Wall Street and all over the place. Bigger than all of that. Bigger than Obama. Bigger than all of the crazy people in Washington and the really crazy people in Austin. So I will tell you this, the first thing you have got to do is know the principles, the founding principles of this country. You have to understand what limited constitutional government is. And then we have to work together to drag the Republican Party or whatever party we end up being in, kicking and screaming to shove government back in a Constitution-sized box.
How many of you have heard that the Constitution is a living, breathing document? Now, I didn't say you had to agree with it, you know. I'm just asking. How would you like to have proof that that is a lie? And if we are going to do as John Adams has required us to do, to make a conscientious determination to stand for the Constitution, reading it is not going to be enough. Having your pocket Constitution in your pocket or your purse is not enough. You've got to be able to stand toe-to-toe with the progressives, the enemies of liberty, and tell them why they believe a lie. There are 5 historical documents that span 700 years that are incorporated into our Constitution. And Alexander Hamilton said every single one of those documents that builds our Constitution is our Bill of Rights. He says this in the Federalist Papers 84. He said not only do we not need a Bill of Rights, but to have one would be dangerous. You see, Alexander Hamilton did not trust the court system. He was a money man, and he knew through history that judges' loyalties could be bought. You must remember at this point that James Madison said that the power vested in the federal government is few and defined. And they didn't even leave few and defined to our imagination. He went ahead and said, it's war, it's peace, it's negotiations, and it's foreign commerce. That's it. That's it. See, our founding fathers knew throughout history that people would become passive in prosperity. They would become lazy in luxury. And they would sit back on their laurels and let the government coast. And 700 years of history proved to them that when the people lose their eternal vigilance, their jealousy for the Republican government, tyranny will take hold. I'm a recovering liberal. I was registered Democrat most of my voting life. I am the daughter of a union businessman. I was taught the only thing more evil than Satan is a Republican. And then I got a job. See, do you believe that liberty is a gift from God? Then who can take it away from you? But you know what? You can give it away. You can give it away. Now, I'm not only a lawyer, but I was a Russian linguist in the Army. And so language is very important to me. Words are very important to me. So I want you to really, really grasp something. And I'm grateful for that education because it explained to me, it taught me, that if you're going to understand a document, you cannot take things out of context. And if you are going to interpret a document that you did not write, you must know the history, the culture, and the intent that went in it. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the federal government. That's not what I said, was it? Others retained by whom? I want you to say that with me. Retained by whom? This is a very important aspect for you to remember. I told you cannot understand the 10th Amendment until you understand the 9th. Is there anything about the federal government in here? Only implied in the negative, that they cannot take or add anything to the rights. Retained by? Now, what we have to understand is first and foremost how to read the 10th Amendment. Because believe me, you don't even realize it, but it's already been manipulated so subtly that we miss it. Because we don't read the 9th Amendment in conjunction with the 10th Amendment. And we've become a society that listens to sound bites treating symptoms instead of diseases. The 10th Amendment reads, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people." This is where the manipulation comes in. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, a division of government, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, a second division of government, or to the people, a third division of government. I've been teaching this now for more than a year, and I ran into an article on a liberal post the other day that talked about the three divisions of government: the federal government, the state, and the people. That's how they dilute our voice. That's how they change it from being a government of the people, by the people, for the people. That's why we can allow our state legislators to go about their business without listening to us for so many years. That is why we can allow Washington, D.C. to completely ignore us for so long, because we have been diluted into 1/3 of the government. But what did I tell you about the 9th Amendment? The powers are retained by whom? So the way our founding fathers intended us to read this was, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, by which we mean the people." You see, Texas is not your state capital. The states are the people. We hire people through elections to represent us. And we better really, really start to own this principle that we are the people in charge, and lose this idea of cult of personality, or we're never going to make any progress. You must take back your state if you hope to take back the federal government. We are a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Now let me chase a little rabbit here real quick, because I get really, really annoyed at the way this administration is working. Okay? Richard Henry Lee wrote the Lee Resolution, 3-step plan on declaring independence from Great Britain. It took them a year to ratify that. And then after they ratified it, it took them 5 years to ratify the Articles of Confederation, the very most important part of the Lee Resolution, the joining of the colonies together to become a United States. 5 years. The most important thing this government has ever done took 5 years to do. So explain to me, if health care was so important, why did we have to pass the bill so we could read the bill? It seems to me, if you want to make that application, if it's just that important, it deserves just that much time. Because the state legislatures will jealously and closely watch the operations of this government and be able to resist with more effect every assumption of power than any other power on earth can do. And the greatest opponents to federal government admit the state legislatures to be the sure guardians of the people's liberty. How many of you understood before that very moment that the primary job responsibility of our elected state legislators is to protect us from federal encroachment and not to create laws?
That's right.
If our state legislators had training like this to know what their primary job description was, maybe they wouldn't be fighting so hard for federal stimulus money. Maybe they wouldn't be fighting so hard to crawl in the lap with Washington, D.C. And they would throw up their hand and say, hey, we are the sure guardians of the people's liberty, and we will retain our rights in this state.
The left has made it where they have special rights to violate your rights. They can do what they did, and none of them have received a civil rights violation, a federal charge of any kind. Where if you were to go and say, like, if there was an organization of women health professionals, and you said, I'm going to go stop them from meeting because I disagree with them, you would have federal civil rights charges on you. Right, you'd be in trouble. But if they do it to you, it's okay. They have special rights, and they have set it up that way. And what the U.S. Attorney's Office said to me is like, yes, I know we don't have civil rights charges on them, but with the political winds as they are, we can. You know? And so here's what I do. I don't support the politically appointed leadership of the FBI nor of the Justice Department, but the men and women who serve our country in those institutions are patriots, you know, and they're just as upset as you are. They can't say that, but they say it interpersonally, they say it. So here's what I figured out, is they have tied the hands of law enforcement so much, but I know what law enforcement needs, and as a private citizen who doesn't work with the FBI, I can get whatever information I want to get legally, and once I have the information, they're allowed to look at it, you know? So I was like, well, wait a minute, that's what I'll do. I'll just organize a bunch of patriots to watch these criminal, not the people who just are mad and say, no, that's someone's right. But the criminal elements of this movement and what's going on, man, this is what we did in Chicago. Okay, so here's how it goes down. Occupy Chicago, having this big rally day, I get some information that a woman named Lisa Fithian, you know, is going to Chicago. And I know Lisa Fithian. And I said, wait a minute, why is she going to Chicago? So a bunch of Breitbart bloggers and a bunch of other groups, bloggers, get together and mount this insane intelligence operation. Follow her, find out she went into the AFL-CIO building, was organizing with the leaders of the SCIU and the Teamsters, right? And then she had set up hundreds of demonstrations around Chicago, right? I said, okay. And I'm like, but I know Lisa Fithian and I know how she does things. So I'm like, these hundreds of demonstrations are just faux demonstrations to throw police off, so then once they set up a command structure, she can pull them all in on one location and interfere with the rights of those Americans who she disagrees with. So we were going through all of and this is sad to say, but I was working on like 2 stories, right? And I was in my jammies on my bed and running this intelligence operation and with just citizens. And then one of the activists messed up and said, see you at the NBA at 5. And I said, what's that? And I said, and I was like, Mortgage Bankers Association is having a convention at the Chicago Hyatt right now. And I said, oh, okay. And I called a supervisory special agent, and they called some people in and made them come back to work. And then they said, well, why would we have 100 demonstrations? Why would we worry about your one demonstration? And I said, because. I said, I'll tell you what. Call the San Antonio division and talk to my former handler or look at my record with you, blah, blah, blah. Long story short, I ended up with this direct line to the command center for the Joint Terrorism Task Force. So I'm writing these stories. I'm getting all these texts in from these bloggers, right? And I'm texting them right to the JTTF. So when, at 5 o'clock, when 3,000 radical anarchists with Teamsters descended on this hotel to go in and pull the Mortgage Bankers Association members out, guess what they found? Riot cops pouring out. There were like 18 arrests, and then the People's Twitter feed said, "How did they know?"
They found over 23,000 fraudulent registrations in Harris County from a group called Houston Votes. And so I ran a site called Emerging Corruption, and what I did was I started doing a little investigation. And I realized that Houston Votes, the name it's like Houston Votes, it just sounds familiar. So I started putting together the pieces, and a guy named Fred Lewis, who runs Houston Votes, was tied into a couple of other groups, one of them being America Votes, which was run by Acorn and Project Vote and SCIU and Planned Parenthood and the usual suspects on the left. So I was able to tie Lewis back to Houston Votes, to Obama for America. That I found out that some of the people that had worked for the Obama campaign were now working in Houston to register voters, and that there was a state representative who was tied into Acorn. So we were publishing these stories and putting them out there, but we weren't getting traction because the left was saying things like 60s style voter intimidation and True the Vote is trying to keep blacks from going to the polls. So that was the environment that I came down there in right after the massive fire destroyed almost all of the election equipment for Harris County. They were blaming, of course, the Republicans and the King Street Patriots, and it was very contentious. It wasn't just about voter fraud. It just wasn't about Houston Votes. This was a larger effort that they were doing on the left. And to tie it back to Acorn, I started looking and I realized that not only were they down there doing fraudulent registrations, but they were also trying to mess around with the redistricting. And they were still mad from 2000 with Tom DeLay and everything. So they figured that this was their opportunity to finally get out there and get the representative coverage that they wanted. So I found this PowerPoint that showed how the left was saying if they got so many seats in Texas, they could take over and they could turn it from maybe more blue than purple. So we were putting this information out there and showing people that this was the real reasoning. You guys are under the Civil Rights Act, so anything that you put out there had to go through the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice was working with Acorn's Project Vote in order to file lawsuits across the country on any of these plans even before they had even been submitted. So we were trying to get the word out there of what was going on in Texas. And Brandon will tell you a little bit more about the media blackout that we were facing. So I came back to Texas November on election night. I got there on election day, and we went out into the field. And that's how I really say that God puts you where you're supposed to be. Because that day I was out there chasing around Quanell X from the new Black Panthers as he was going from polling place to polling place, intimidating the poll watchers and getting them thrown out. And at one of the polling places I ran into Alice Lanahan. Now, I had met Alice before, but that was really the time when we started working together because she was out there interviewing people on the ground as soon as it had happened. Even before we got there, Alice was there. So we started kind of thinking and strategizing together as to how we could get out there and really take back Texas, because you guys may not realize it, but they are organizing extremely. If you go to the blogs like idealist.org or Craigslist, you'll see all of the ads out there for organizers in Harris County and up near Austin and Dallas and everywhere across the state, because they know if they take Texas, they will take the rest of the country. And the left is ready. They are just waiting for 2012 to activate their plan. So what we've been trying to do is to get out there and let people know what's really going on. Just like you guys found out a couple of days ago that Acorn was behind the Occupy Wall Street protest. We had known this for a while, but we just didn't have the proof. Just because it's got a different name, New York Communities for Change, that's New York Acorn, run by the same people in the same office with the same stationery. So this is what we're facing now. You're facing Acorn 2.0. They've gotten smarter, they've gone underground, they've learned to cover their tracks and to assimilate into other groups. They put faces out there of these young idealistic kids who really don't have a clue what they're protesting, but they're doing it because they want to have their own Vietnam or their own 60s moment. So they get those people out there, then you get the paid agitators and the people that are pushing pushing them to do their dirty work. So imagine how that's going to go in 2012 when we have rioting and police in the street having to fight down protesters, and they don't have any respect for public law. One of the quotes from the New York Post was right after they had won. Bloomberg was threatening to kick them out of the park, and then he said they could stay in the park, but they were going to have to take their sleeping bags and stuff up. And then eventually they said they could just stay. So when that happened, a bunch of those protesters went down Wall Street going crazy and fighting with the police. And one of them said, they're going to have to get an army to stop us now. A few police officers just aren't going to cut it. So I think that we need to realize what we're dealing with. This is something they've been planning for a long time. We've had people that have gone undercover inside of Organizing for America. We've got someone here that's been working with some of the Hispanic and Latino groups, and she can tell you that there was whispers of what they were trying to do as early as April and May. They just weren't putting the plan out there for everyone to see. But they've been planning this for a while. It's not just here, it's across the country, and they're getting ready for something big. So we have to get ready for something big. We have to learn how to fight. That's one great thing about conservatives, is that we're feisty, but we don't know how to fight. So we've got to get there. And when I'm talking about fighting, not using the tactics of the left and sinking down to their level, but we have to be able to address some of the things that are going on, and that means we have to mobilize, we have to get smart, we have to get organized, and we also have to get our youth involved, because they're taking our kids and putting them out there for causes that they have no idea that they're on the wrong side. They don't realize that while they're wanting this defining moment, this is the defining moment in history, but they're on the wrong team. So it's up to us to pull them back on the right side. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so proud to be here today in this room full of leaders, people that are away from their family, that are taking time to come here and figure out what the solution is, because it's not going to be easy. When Michelle Obama said that her husband wasn't going to let us go back to our normal lives, she was right. This will be something that is going to take people who are door knockers. We need folks on the ground. We need folks that can work with the churches. We need people that can do the information. We need folks that can work at the polls. There's so many opportunities out here for us to mobilize, but we have to be smart about how we do it, and we do have to work together. And that means some of the groups that have never traditionally gotten together before are going to have to put some of those grievances aside and at least work on some things together that we have common ground on. But to tell you guys a little bit about, I'm pretty sure some of you have heard about the things that happened with Acorn in 2008. When I was working with them, I was in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that happened is that I was sitting at my desk in D.C. and I got a call. And it was from the Obama campaign. And I was really excited because I was a diehard liberal. We had just come back from a retreat where Zach Paulette, who was the head of Acorn, got up and said that he supervised Obama in the 90s and that Acorn produces leaders. So he was telling us that we could be the next president of the United States. So I was so excited when I got this call from the campaign. I sent an email off to my supervisors, and what I got in return was a thumb drive, about this big. And on it was the second quarter Obama donor list from 2007. And they gave me that list, and they told me that they wanted me to contact maxed out presidential donors who had already given to the campaign but could give to Acorn, who was working to get Obama elected and was coordinating with the campaign. So, exactly. So one of the things that I knew there in 2007 is that I did not want to be a part of an organization that was doing that. I didn't want to be a part of a group that was, we were cheating and we were trying to win, but we were doing all of these tactics to get Obama elected. There are Acorn documents that go back to 2005 that say Obama in 08. This is before he got up and became popular. This is before anyone knew who Barack Obama was. They were planning on 08 being the year of Obama. So in July of 2008, I contacted the New York Times. They had just revealed the story about the embezzlement scandal within Acorn, where Acorn's brother embezzled over $1 million. So the Times was actually covering something negative about Acorn. I couldn't believe it. So I contacted them thinking, as a liberal, that they would run with this story. But from July of 08 to October of 08, I was in confidential informant for them, and every single story that they printed was more watered down than the next. They had evidence, emails, financial records, checks, everything that showed that this was not only a criminal enterprise, but that some of the people could go to jail under RICO statutes. But every single story was more watered down. And just to tell you a little bit about connections very quickly, most of you guys should know that the New York Times, of course, is in financial trouble right now. Half of their building, the New York Times building, is owned by Bruce Ratner out of New York. Bruce Ratner is the guy that is responsible for bringing the New Jersey Nets to Brooklyn. And he's a big, so the New York Times wanted to sell their half of the building, but they could only do it with the Ratner's permission. And at that same time, Bruce Ratner gave a $1.5 million loan to Acorn to keep them afloat during the embezzlement scandal. So not only was Acorn working with their business partner, but the New York Times had a vested financial interest in not exposing Acorn because they didn't want to upset the guy that owned half of their building. So just keep that in mind. So on October 23rd, 2008, I received a call from Stephanie Strom with the New York Times, and she told me that her editor had told her to stand down on the story. She was coming to D.C. to get copies of the Obama donor list, more corroboration of coordination between Acorn and the Project Vote and the Obama campaign. When I called her back, she told me that it was not the policy of the New York Times to print a game changer that close to the election for either side. So they buried the story. CNN did a 3-tape interview that never aired, and ABC News and Martha Raddatz were able to verify the authenticity of the donor list, because this isn't the one that he gave to the FEC guys. This had the lower dollar donors, you know, the ones where he turned the credit card verification off on his website, so the $25 donors, the $5 donors, the overseas donors. All of that he wouldn't give to the FEC, he gave to Acorn, and they were able to verify that list, but they would not print the story. So there was a control. The fix was in for Obama, you know, going back to 06, and the media was the main reason why he got elected. There's a story that hasn't been told yet that's going to be coming out pretty soon that will show that there was even more coordination than we think about getting Obama in office in 2008. So just look for that. Thank you.
The voter registration charges are not against Acorn, but against a handful of employees, part-timers, hired by the dozens to sign up voters. Acorn not the perpetrator, but itself a victim, paying for real voter registrations and required by law to submit registration sheets in their entirety, even if they do contain bogus names.
My understanding, by the way, in terms of the voter fraud, because having run a voter registration drive, I know how problems arise. This is typically a situation where Acorn probably paid people to get registrations, and these folks, not wanting to actually register people because that's actually hard work, just went into a phone book or made up names and submitted false registrations to get paid.
The one who gets the most people there gets the most delegates. That's the bottom line. And how they determine the delegates is on these sign-in sheets. So when so many people were registered illegally for Obama, they obtained a lion's portion of the delegates, and then it percolated up. So they had illegal delegates at the precinct level, who then went on to the Senate district level, who went on to the state level. And that's how they control the delegate count. And they may win Texas through control of these precinct sign-in sheets where people signed in illegally.
We have the numbers. We don't have to follow the rules because we're going to inundate the process, and we have the numbers, and you may say these are the rules and stand up and say this is how it's going to be done. Well, we have 5 times as many people as you have, so we're going to say, sorry, we don't have to follow the rules. And that's what happened at each successive level.
So I think the strategy was to bring in a huge number of people, overwhelm the system, and in the chaos that ensued, they could steal the election. That is my personal opinion.
They blocked the doors. In fact, literally blocked the doors. It's like there were a lot more Obama people at the front door. Hillary people were in the back. They would not let them in.
I got death threats because my address was in the video from Obama supporters and people calling me whore and skank.
Not only a party would allow this, but that our own citizens would perpetrate this against one another when we have stood firm for everyone's ability to vote and that every vote would count.
I've always been believing in the system, and this is the first time I feel like I've been betrayed of that trust.
Probably the worst thing that we saw in Indiana was parents coming into the office saying that the Gary Public School System had bused their children to Crown Point, Indiana, to vote in the election. But if children were being told to go to the polls and vote for Obama, in which they were, then parents were livid and they were outraged and they wanted to know what could be done about this. And so they brought in an actual slate of candidates that each student had been given to take them to the polls to vote for Mr. Obama and his slate. It was atrocious because what lesson in civics were the kids learning that day? What? Win by any means necessary? Because the right to vote is a sacred vote in America, so how could we take school children, bust them on a school day, tell them who to vote for, then pay for their lunch and dismiss them from school early on taxpayer money? So yes, the voter fraud was rampant in Gary. I could never vote for Barack Obama. We saw not only voters being harassed, but campaign workers like myself and others were harassed. I am still being harassed on the street where I live. If this is acceptable in American politics, then our country is in trouble.
I believe in democratic principles. My question is, does my party believe in democratic principles?
They say they want everybody in this party to unite and get behind one person, and you're cutting up each other on the floor.
Some people saw outright cheating. Other people just saw strong-arm tactics. I saw fraud.
This is what it is. They have manipulated the system. They knew exactly how to do it, and they knew how to corrupt the process. I thought it was an isolated incident just in my precinct. It's not. That's what bothers me. It's like, and how can we just not look at the system as like, if it happens in every precinct, and every one of us has a very, very similar story. It's like, I cannot just believe that, we don't see it as like, a manipulated situation where I feel like, and people told me from Obama supporters who went to the trainings have told me that they have been trained to be aggressive.
Party's gone. It's been taken over by the Obama people.
And this is America. I didn't think we would do that here.
U.S. society has increasingly been polarized in the last 3 years, very quickly, really. Not unlike Europe, I guess, in many ways, but a hard right emerging, an armed, new hard right emerging with massive control of media and an instant 24-hour news of its own. And so the ability to kind of feed, seize on a soundbite sentence, palling around with terrorists, for example, and then repeat it endlessly is very strange and very odd. Give me a left. I have a right. I mean, you can almost feel Obama saying that, and he surely does have a right, and it's racist, it's armed, it's hostile, it's unspeakable. If it had been, if the left had a demonstration in Washington against Bush, armed, openly armed demonstration of black people in Washington demanding an end to this, statist government, imagine, there would have been a massive bloodbath, right? And so the idea that now it's flipped and you have white people armed demanding an end to this president, it's very crazy producing, really, but very ominous. We were a little wrong about a lot of things, including the immediate possibility of revolution in the United States. But we wanted to be on that side, and we felt really strongly that trying to, open a front, as we thought of it, inside the heartland, inside the belly of the beast, and show that you could not be caught, that you could take them by surprise, that you could still have a public voice. We thought we'd do it.
I brought up the subject of what's going to happen after we take over the government. We become responsible then for administrating, 250 million people. And there was no answers. No one had given any thought to economics. How are you going to clothe and feed these people? The only thing that I could get was that they expected that the Cubans and the North Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians would all want to occupy different portions of the United States. They also believed that their immediate responsibility would be to protect against what they called the counter-revolution. And they felt that this counter-revolution could best be guarded against by creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest, where we would take all the people who needed to be re-educated into the new way of thinking and teach them how things were going to be. I asked, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. And when I pursued this further, they estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers. And when I say eliminate, I mean kill. 25 million people. I want you to imagine sitting in a room with 25 people, most of which have graduate degrees from Columbia and other well-known educational centers, and hear them figuring out the logistics for the elimination of 25 million people. And they were dead serious.
We, think that the real terrorist is the American government, state terrorism unleashed against the world.
After these groups, these radicals from the 60s, these weather underground people, were tired of being blown up and put in jail and on the FBI's most wanted list, they assimilated into American society. They went into academia, they went into the nonprofit world, and they went into the Republican Party. And that's one of the biggest problems that we've had over the years, is that we have people on the inside that are doing just enough missteps to make the whole party look bad. But the Tea Party has a unique chance in history that we haven't had since the 60s, when we had blacks and whites marching together. Right now, many blacks are upset with Obama. They don't know what to do. They see him catering to the gays and the Latinos and the illegals, but we're told that because we're black, we have to vote for him, that we've got to get him reelected. Reverend Al Sharpton has come out and said just as much, and that if we do speak out against him, we will be punished in our community.
Is the leadership of Acorn, aren't they white?
I am so glad you asked me that. It is so funny because in 2008, when Acorn was going through its embezzlement scandal, they elected Bertha Lewis as their head. Bertha Lewis was the chief organizer, this woman who had once been on national staff with me, and we were the only two black people on national staff. Wade Rathke, who, I don't mean to offend anybody, but he has got to be the whitest white guy I know, ran Acorn for 38 years. But when in the time of trouble, they put a black woman who wore dashiki and braids on TV and tried to make it look like you guys were beating up on a poor black organization. The funny thing is that while they were telling white people that it was too dangerous to go into the hood, and that's why you needed Acorn, that we were blacks organizing blacks, most of the national staff and the organizers were young, rich, liberal white kids with trust funds who were going into these black communities and organizing these folks while they were telling you it was too dangerous. That's how they kept us divided and confused. So on TV, they painted as blacks helping blacks. But like I said, when I was on national staff, it was just me and Bertha Lewis, and that was it. but they were able to control that narrative. Once again, they work with the media and the TV, so when they go out there and they take these pictures, it's just tight enough to where it looks like a bunch of angry black faces, and you don't see the white girl in the back with the clipboard and the bullhorn. As far as national is concerned, the organization was set up to be subversive from the beginning. Wade Rathke and Zach Paulette, who started Acorn, came out of the Weather Underground in the 60s and the SDS, and they started Acorn out of Arkansas, so they knew what they were doing using those welfare moms, because it becomes a shield. It's really hard to investigate what they're doing, because every time you look into it, they go, oh, you don't want black people to vote? You don't want black people to rise up? That was their shield. The black community allowed them to do a lot of things that created power for these people, political power, and were able to get people like George Soros into the position he is now to elect the president.
I was just at a conference, and I was honored to speak at the National Press Club. So I was speaking there at this event, and it was all about George Soros. Just about every other thing that I dislike and I think is a threat to our nation, I found out is funded by George Soros. Last year he spent right around $500 million to left-of-center organizations. And that was directly, that's what we can pick out, you know? So I think Texas is such a, I think that we represent a sense of liberty to most people in this nation. And I think that not only for there are I guess, legitimate reasons, like electoral reasons and so forth, to attack the state of Texas or attack conservatives in the state of Texas, but there's a psychological effect to taking over the state of Texas. So that's why we're under such attack, you know. And most of the Soros money that comes in, and this right now is coming in against our criminal justice system, you know. That's what's going on. It's a shame that people can't say their minds. They can't speak your mind without being attacked. But the problem is the level of attack you go under. You know, and I'm not even going to say the kind of attacks they lob at people. But they really do. They lob. Like, I'm in a lawsuit with the New York Times right now. Because according to the New York Times, I and the FBI manipulated two young, innocent, anarchistic kids to make bombs. You know, in the bomb plot when they tried to blow up the 2008 Republican National Convention. Y'all know about that? Yeah. But I'm going to first say the fact that not all of you know about it is because the GOP is all about missing opportunities. Can you imagine what that would have done to the electorate right before the election when Obama was elected? If, with all of his radical connections, if a bomb plot from people linked to him, you know, was exposed right before against Republicans, what would that have done to the election?
President McCain.
Yeah, it might have.
VP Sarah.
It might have, yeah. It might have, and so it's all about missed opportunities. Like, remember the other night, the last presidential debate, and they were asking questions about Occupy Wall Street? We all have been exposing what's behind it and the people behind it. Did you hear one candidate up there get critical? No, you didn't. Not at all. Because they try to shoot for the middle of the road and what's safe. We have truth on our side and they lie. We don't lie, they lie. That's the difference, right? So in the 2008 Republican National Convention. Okay, so here's what happened. I was asked to infiltrate a meeting, and the FBI at that time, long story, I know it sounds kind of weird, you probably not used to hear that every day, but I was an undercover operative in the Human Source Program. So I was what's known as an operational source. Some people on the left call me a snitch, but actually I wasn't. And I actually wasn't an informant either. I was an operational source, but that's okay. You don't need to know that. So I was asked to go. And I said, well, why am I going to this? And they said, well, we have reports that there is a group from Minnesota going around the country trying to set up something called the RNC Welcoming Committee. And they're threatening to use force to shut the Republican convention down by any means necessary. And I said, okay, I'll go check it out. And I went, and lo and behold, there were a bunch of anarchists from Minnesota who had come down and were traveling the country. And they were showing videos of Molotov cocktails being used and all kinds of different illegal things. They were handing out big maps with all the corporations' headquarters and corporate targets and where the banks were and where the bankers lived, right? And where the EMS towers were so people could communicate, everything. And what they asked people to do was to set up into 3 groups. And they said we need red, yellow, and green. The green group is going to be the group of average liberal demonstrators who don't want to get arrested. The yellow group is going to be people who are willing to get arrested. And what they're going to do is sit down in the road so the buses of delegates can't come through, and they're going to handcuff themselves together and chain their arms together inside a PVC pipe so law enforcement can't get them out in a quick manner. And the red group, so the green group was to go on the road, protest, just normal nice protesters like the Occupy Wall Street people, right? And while they were doing that, that was going to provide cover for the yellow group who was chaining down. And if when the police said, get out of the road, we're going to arrest you, when the green group got out of the road, if the yellow group hasn't locked down yet, then the red group was to come in, and those were the black mask wearing people who were actually going to attack law enforcement and then flee. And that way it gave time for the yellow group to lock arms. So it was all a very coordinated effort. And so I said, well, I will definitely work on this investigation with you. And what I found was that a woman named Lisa Fithian, who is the SCIU, according to their own website, one of their favorite disruptors who they call in to organize protests and strikes. Most of the unions call her in to do so. She's also the one who shut down Seattle for the WTO. She's also the one the New York Times just gave a front page story to and said that she was just a normal working woman who was in New York to help out with the protest, that kind of stuff. You know, it just happened. Even though they know all this stuff just like I do. But they had called her in. She was a head of an organization called United for Peace and Justice. United for Peace and Justice is the large, peaceful, democratic, so most of the groups in the Democratic Party and what I call the nonprofit industrial complex are part of that organization with 1,400 groups. She's on their steering committee, but she's also the one who organized these like anarchists. Isn't that something? So they go to Minnesota and they attempted to prevent Republicans from exercising their constitutionally guaranteed right to assemble and speak, right? And they attempted to do so by any means necessary, and they did. The thing was, the FBI and local law enforcement agencies put a lot of effort out, and we stopped them. We busted their bottoms in a bad way. And so they fought back. The whole left establishment fought back, and ultimately, Republicans were able to elect a political delegate or appoint someone to represent them in the national election. But the entire left mobilized, and even though the majority of liberals would not have done what these anarchists did, whenever the anarchists got in trouble, then the first story on it was from the New York Times, and rather than it say left of center activists spawned bombs, right? To burn and maim Republicans and law enforcement, which is what they said their goal was. The New York Times put out a story and it said, peace activists feel betrayed by their government. And I was like, wow. And they tied it into the Bush era Patriot Act. And they've been attacking ever since. So that's what happened there. Many of the FBI agents who were working on the Iranian bomb plot were not aware of the Fast and Furious issue, the Operation Gunrunner. And I know that they were embarrassed and mortified that some people in the organizations they work with would have that kind of lack of judgment, So I can't say what happened. I mean, it's not that I can't say. I don't know, and we will not know, honestly. We can only speculate, and it will probably stay that way. What happened on the highest levels of government, of the Justice Department with the president and his people. But I can say the men and women of the FBI and the various agencies they're not happy about what's going on in their name. Leave it at that.
Durante más de media hora, las ráfagas de alto poder se dejaron escuchar por la colonia Puerta de la Laguna. Fue tal el tiroteo que los policías tuvieron que reabastecer sus armas. En medio del enfrentamiento, 2 policías capitalinos y 2 policías estatales resultaron lesionados, por lo que fueron llevados de urgencia a distintos hospitales de la ciudad de Tepic.
Son 3-7, dice. Son 3-7 arriba.
Un civil que había quedado en medio del fuego cruzado también resultó lesionado, por lo que fue trasladado por socorristas de Protección Civil del Estado al Hospital General de Tepic. Finalmente, los policías lograron dar muerte a los presuntos sicarios que habían permanecido parapetados en una camioneta blindada.
I spent the last year covering our border all the way from San Diego into Arizona, and one of the things that I had heard often was from Border Patrol agents is these incursions, Mexican military crossing our border, assisting drug smugglers and also human smugglers across the border. I had heard this over and over again, and not only from the Border Patrol agents, but also from the immigrants themselves, who would hide on the other side of the border before they made their run from these drug smugglers and from the Mexican military. Documents show 216 incursions over the last 10 years of Mexican military into the United States. And just today, I received information from a chief deputy actually out in Hudspeth County, Texas, and the FBI confirmed today that Mexican military incurred at 3 o'clock this afternoon in Texas into the United States, assisting drug smugglers, and I was able to confirm that before I got on the air with you tonight, Joe.
The violence of the Mexican drug wars may seem far away. This quiet, mostly conservative city of 400,000 is also a major distribution point for Mexican cartels.
Unfortunately, the last few years we've seen heroin usage, in particular in a couple of our high schools, increasing. There's no question that goes back to the Mexican cartels.
Colorado Springs was the starting point for a 2-year federal investigation into a web of trafficking that spanned 15 states. It ended last June with a total of 2,200 people arrested and nearly 70 tons of marijuana, 2.5 tons of cocaine, 1,400 pounds of heroin, and $154 million in cash seized.
These people have so much money, they can literally buy cities. You know, a person would arrive, middle-aged, Hispanic, with papers, good papers. He had money in Mexico. He'd buy a restaurant in the city, usually a seafood restaurant, Mexican restaurant. He'd go around to all the civic groups and invite them to have their meetings at his restaurant. He's going to give them discounts. Go to the police chief or the local police officers, make friends with them, invite them to have their parties and have dinner there, and he'd take care of the bill and that kind of thing. And pretty soon he knows most of the major players in the city. What they don't know is that he's a part of the drug cartel. He will eventually finance when there's an election. So now they have the city council, they have the trash thing, they have now nightclubs, car repair places. These are all under the control of this guy who came in at first and set the thing up. And that's where your corruption is, you know. And this kind of pattern, I've seen it. It was first brought to my attention by a couple of city councilmen in Linwood. The same thing was happening in Southgate at the time, Bell Gardens. We saw some of it in Huntington Park, Hawaiian Gardens, Cudahy. So I'm talking about this pattern, and I go to New Mexico. When I tell the story to the New Mexicans, they all start going, wait, wait, wait. You know, that's exactly what's happening to us. Same pattern. And then same thing in Texas, and same thing in Colorado and other cities, usually small cities. There's your first problem, you know. The legal immigrants aren't doing this. That's not them. It's the illegal immigrants who are coming here.
My name is Maria Espinoza. I'm with the Remembrance Project. The Remembrance Project honors and remembers Americans and legal residents who've been killed or murdered by an illegal alien. I strongly feel that there is an agenda out there, and that there is the Democrats and the liberals, they want to bring down this wonderful country. For some reason, some of their key leaders do not like America. I would say to them they should leave. And I believe that they want to bring in some of these people who are illegal, not informed. They don't even require them to learn English, so they don't assimilate. They keep them right there in this one little area in a certain level of class, and that's where they want them. They're doing those people, they're exploiting them. Our main goal is to inform the whole country about the adverse effects of an unsecure border. And when people break the laws and a government allows that to happen and allows a certain group to get a pass that is unfair, it sends an unfair message to the citizens. If you cannot simply uphold the law, you certainly don't need to be in office. Stolen Life's quilt displays the photo of the American or illegal resident who has been murdered by an illegal. And this is very important because we want everyone to know what is going on here. America is backwards right now. For instance, earlier this summer, when a murder of a young 16-year-old girl, the Sauceda young lady who was murdered in San Antonio, after that execution, the media and protesters went to the home of the murdered victim's family and protested, and they were knocking on their door till 11:30 at night. They wanted a statement. They were victimizing that family once again. And this killer was in jail longer than this little girl was alive on this earth.
Do you have any information on what's happening to Border Patrol Agent Diaz?
He is an agent who is in jail now. He was recently sentenced to 2 years. He's been in jail in solitary confinement, shackled by his hands and ankles. And he is in jail now for something that's a very common practice among law enforcement, and that is pulling up of the handcuffs of a drug smuggler that he contained. And that drug smuggler was given a visa by our own government to come across and testify against our agent. And with that visa, the drug smuggler smuggled in more drugs into our country. And you won't hear about that, most likely, in the news. The Mexican consulate in Del Rio was instrumental in bringing charges against Agent Diaz. Johnny's son is an attorney who indicted Campion and Ramos. There is a pattern here, and also the government is trying to send a message to the Border Patrol agents. If you do your job, this is what you'll get, and that's what they're telling them.
So you think there's just a conspiracy of sorts between the Mexican government and the current Obama administration and certain federal attorneys to basically allow an open border policy, and is that correct?
Absolutely, and we have the fast and furious and the terrorists. That's a whole issue. I mean, a porous border, it's very dangerous to us. Very, very dangerous. And Americans, we're so civilized and we uphold the law. We have no idea what other countries are like, and we're welcoming them. In Houston, Texas, I was invited to go to the Mexican consulate on a different matter. And the Harris County Hospital District was there with their Gold Card program. And it's very disturbing when our own citizens and residents cannot get hospitalization and health care. When illegals are told to come up to the Mexican consulate, they fill up the entire Mexican consulate downstairs, all the way out the door, along the building, down the sidewalks, all there for Harris County benefits. And I've seen this with my own eyes, and I completely disagree with it. I believe that if Harris County residents knew about it, they would be up in arms. The Gold Card program allows a person to have to get free hospitalization and go to a health clinic.
So Harris County, Texas is providing first-rate medical care to any citizen they can find from old Mexico. Is that what you're saying?
Correct, as long as they prove that they reside in the county. And remember, how do we know who is here? They don't have IDs. They can show up, 20 people can most likely show up with the same utility bill.
The state of Texas, not only do we have in-state tuition, but we also give taxpayer-funded money grants to illegal aliens.
Has there been anybody in the state legislature who has put forth a bill to try and track some of the costs of illegal aliens in the state of Texas?
Yes. Representative Zorwas actually introduced a bill in 2009. It was reintroduced this past session that would simply require state agencies to report the cost of services to illegal aliens. And it did not pass last session or this session. And our argument has been, how can our legislators have an intelligent discussion on this subject if you do not have a clue how much money you're spending on it? So every time we start talking about figures, we always stand back from that because we don't know. We don't know how many illegal aliens are here or how much money we're spending because it's not being tracked.
So are you trying to tell me with 101 Republican state House members and a Republican Speaker of the House,
right,
we can't get that bill through? So we can't take care of our own pocketbook?
We could not, and we thought surely we would this session since the budget was so important.
Do you know who held the bill up?
Once again, it was everything goes through State Affairs.
Okay, so State Affairs is who?
Byron Cook.
So Byron Cook. And what about in the Senate?
Last session it was actually Bert Solomon's.
Okay.
And it didn't get out.
So Bert Solomon and Byron Cook don't
Right.
want to tell us how much money we're paying to educate and
medical care.
Have medical care for
Everything.
Mexican citizens, correct?
Right, correct.
And are they Democrats or Republicans?
They're Republicans.
Okay. Do you know about the Senate? Do you have any idea?
No, I don't.
Okay. All right.
In the recent redistricting that we're going through actually right now, one of the problems is that so many illegal aliens actually live along the border region and they are counted in the census. The redistricting is based on a population that should not even be in our country, and I think that's extremely problematic.
Are any of those folks voting, or is it just mainly the populations being counted?
We don't really know if they're voting.
Okay. Nobody's got a handle.
Nobody's got a handle because typically what happens is if they do vote and anybody brings attention to it and they try to go after them, a lot of times by the time they determine who they really are, once again because of the fraudulent identification documents, you know, nothing is going to be done about it.
I think that the state of Texas should take some cues from Mexico. Mexico has some very stringent laws about who can be there as an alien. When my husband and I go to visit family in Mexico, we are very mindful of the way that we behave, because if you are not a Mexican citizen, they will want to see your papers and find out exactly who you are, what you're doing here, when you plan to leave. Those are all very fair questions.
All my grandparents were born in Mexico, and I am very proud of my Hispanic heritage. We are losing who we are as a country. Without question, we need to reduce the scope of government, the reach of government, and one way of doing that is reduce taxes. Healthcare is an example of what needs to be in the free enterprise system. But yeah, every time we take a dollar out of someone's wallet, it's less money that they can spend on businesses and development of jobs. So, and the federal government is just totally dropped the ball. If we do consider compassion for Americans and for those that are trying to come across and putting their lives in jeopardy, that we can address this issue. But we've got to make those tough decisions, and people haven't been doing it, and that's why people are suffering. I'm fed up like everybody else is. I can't sit idly by any longer and see our country fall apart.
I just wanted to quickly add something to that. The way that Obama runs his campaign in 2008 and the way he's running it now has allowed for foreign donations, or the possibility of foreign donations, to come in through the website. We really need people that are willing to dig through these FEC records as they are released and look for red flags like they did in 2008, because while we're not sure how the money is being used or what the paybacks are, we do know that he has allowed for foreign money to come into his campaign. Thank you.
I know for a fact that this Justice Department shuts down investigations in a way that they should not. And I'm not just talking about ones that implicate them, like Eric Holder. I'm saying in general. Like, I know for a fact that there were a number of investigations that were going on with Acorn that consistently got shut down. I know for a fact that there's a number of investigations in the Global Exchange and Code Pink and the relationships they have with Hugo Chavez in Venezuela that are consistently shut down. I know they're shut down. And one of the ways that I can always tell when they're shut down is I usually, like I said, I try to hold people accountable too in office and who are federal employees. And I say, look guys, like, y'all need to let me know if y'all are doing something with this, or else I'm going to take care of it through media. So some stories, and when they tell me like, well, you might as well, that means that you're not going to damage what we're doing. And so I know that that's occurring.
We really need to get back there and understand that we have to be strategic, find out who we can work with, and we'll look at the results of what they're doing. As we've seen from the Occupy Wall Street protests, we're not going to get another chance. They are planning for anarchy. One of the protesters, after they were able to successfully overrun the police, they said that they're not going to be able to stop us now. They're going to need an army. An army. So imagine where this is going to go. We've already exposed that it is Acorn behind Occupy Wall Street and some of these other protests around the country. If this gets to where Obama looks like he's not going to get elected, they're not just going to have class warfare. We're going to have race warfare too. When Obama speaks, he gives two speeches. There's the one that you hear, and then there's the code words that he embeds in there for the black community. People need to understand that certain words cause black people to get riled up because they feel like their rights are being taken away. It's just like in 2010, in the black areas, they had signs that said, "We've got your back, Obama, vote Democrat." You know what that means? That means these white people are ganging up against Obama, so we've got to stand together and vote Democrat as black people. And one more thing people should know. You know what Yes We Can meant in 2008? it meant, yes, we can elect a black president. He is putting code words out there to activate people to fight amongst each other, and that's how he's going to be able to keep control. And this is not being radical, this is not being hysterical, it's just watching a pattern of behavior and being on the left as they plan these activities out.
I work with Andrew Breitbart. Do y'all know who Andrew Breitbart is? Awesome. Yeah, I love him. I love him so much. And I'm going to tell you what I love about him, is he knows how to fight and he knows how to defend people who are conservatives and people who want the freedom to raise their children the way they want to and live their life the way they want to and not be called bigots because they disagree with whatever leftist agenda is the flavor of the month or the year. I love that about him. You know, so I came here today and I wanted to talk about the left and how many of the agitators that Anita brought up are actually people who live in Austin, right? And they're from Austin, like Lisa Fithian and other people who many years ago were my mentor before I ended up undercover with the FBI for several years and put a bunch of people in prison. It's a long story, like I told you. And I wanted to talk about one of the ways that we break down false narratives that you're a bunch of racists and don't care, is that we try to show that, hey, even though the narrative exists right now that if you care about people, you vote left, and if you want to vote for rich white people, you vote right, that's what the narrative is in a lot of the youth today. We know that the narrative is that if you want to care about people, by people helping people in an efficient way, that's actually biblical sound, where we're supposed to be good stewards with our talents, you vote right. And if you think that a centralized federal government far away is the way to help people, who does so in an inefficient manner where you give them $10 and they give $1 back in a manner that only really perpetuates poverty, then you vote left, right? And I wanted to talk about that. But then I said, well, I have some other stuff I have to talk about today with you guys. So another thing that we did is we started an organization called Friends of the Bureau, which is basically mobilizing people who care about this country to work with and support law enforcement with what's going on right now in our nation with Occupy Wall Street, but not just Occupy Wall Street. You know, many years ago, Bernadine Dorn from the Weather Underground, anybody familiar with that? You know, she gave some statements and said, this revolutionary push didn't work. But what we can do is we can attack the criminal justice system. We can attack the grand juries. We can make people lose faith in law enforcement because this is a nation of laws. And we have to erode people's faith in those who enforce those laws. That's what she said. And do you know that Texas is the focal point? Texas and Louisiana, with the Innocence Project, they do some good stuff, don't get me wrong. There are some people who have been wrongly convicted, and they get them out, and I think that's amazing. I appreciate that, right? But what they do is they systematically are causing people in this state and in Louisiana and across the country to not believe in ballistic science, not believe in fingerprints, not believe in DNA, not believe the word of law enforcement, of the use of informants, of people who testify for the government, for law enforcement, and they're attacking our criminal justice system in a way that is unprecedented. To where now, even when I had to testify in Austin in a federal court because an anarchist was threatening my life for what I did with the FBI, she got off because I was painted as a right-wing nut, and she said it was anybody would be angry at me and want to attack me. She didn't threaten me because I worked with law enforcement. She threatened me because I'm a right-wing racist. That's what she said. And do you know what? The jury in Travis County let her off. You know?
Yeah, I believe that.
And so I look at that and I say, okay, we have some problems.
And I just want to let everyone also know that Soros is funding the Texas Tribune. And if you go on agendawise.com, Weston and Daniel have really covered, and they really do go after and uncover from the media side in Texas what Soros is doing in Texas.
And they say in this book, the reason why we have to do this is for power. It's all power. And so they're in this game to win. Some of the political elite, they're like drug dealers. They have the media, and the politicians are creating the content and the propaganda. They take it down to the Acorn type organizations, and they find the pushers, and then the pushers push it out into our communities, and they're indoctrinating our children and our grandchildren. And what are we doing?
we send each other an email. It's really scary. But what we're also doing is we're at work and we're taking care of our children. And over the last 30 years, we've been told that we can't talk about politics. We can't talk about religion. We can't go on Facebook and Twitter at work. We're supposed to be working. And so while they've been indoctrinating our families and our children, we've been at work. Well, it's time to get in the game, folks.
It is necessary for us to answer the call of our generation. Do you know what our call is? Life, fortune, sacred honor. Now, I'm not talking about life meaning picking up your musket the way our founding fathers did. We're not there yet. But it's about time we stop sitting on the fence, because November is a long time away. And I know there's lots of people that know the rate this administration's going, November is too long.
Guess what? There are people in this world betting this country will break up over these very issues that we're discussing right now. If it's not a financial breakup, it will be a belief, it will be a breakup of beliefs. You need to think about this. You remember I told you a word called prescience, which means looking over the hill and seeing what could happen. The people that you elect, just think about this, could be the very people who have to put together a constitution one day for a new country. I'm not talking about secession, I'm talking about necessity. It could be a revolt, but I'll tell you what most likely it's going to be. It's going to be a financial collapse and a collapse of authority where no one trusts that authority, and you have to go out and you have to organize a whole new government. I'll tell you a little story, because I've been in a number of FEMA meetings over the years. This state and Oklahoma had meetings right before Y2K on what would happen if everything went to pot. You may think of Oklahoma as rivals. You might want to think of them as your buddies. Because I'll tell you something right now, the people in Oklahoma have their act together.
For the good of the next generations, please, not only wake up yourselves, your neighbors, your friends, even your enemies, even if they don't want to listen the first time, maybe the second and the third time. I beg of you, you are told about the questions your grandchildren will have for you. I'm telling you, they will curse you while you are dead. Why didn't you do something to stop it?